So, let's say you're playing a friendly game of hide and seek with the ultimate boss of hide and seek champions, and you want to make sure he doesn't find you like ever. You know, normal boss stuff. You could hide behind the drapes and hope he doesn't find you, or throw him off a boat in the open ocean with no supplies and hide in some random island you've discovered that just so happens to be one of the furthest points you can be from civilization. That could work. Welcome to Pitcairn Island, the most isolated place in the world. So what's up with the island? How did it come to be? How's it like living in the island? And most importantly, how do you even get there? Pitcairn is actually made out of 3 different islands. There's the Anderson Island, which is actually the largest one. There's O'Neill Island, which is kind of a small atoll. And then there's Pitcairn Island itself, where Adamstown is, the only inhabited settlement. At least I think that's the only settlement. I'm pretty sure there isn't a free island base camp and a dream house on Anderson Island. I mean, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure there's not. I mean, what great views, incredible isolation, be prepared to stay there for extended days as sailboats often sink or don't show up. That's pretty good. I'll give it 5 stars, but there is no 5G connection, also no signs of McDonald's. Very disappointed as an American. Overall, just alright. Yeah, that's cool from a hotel with 4.5 stars. That's pretty good. On a global scale, the Pitcairn Islands are located in the southern Pacific, one of the most remote areas of the world. It's 3,500 miles away from the American continent and 3,100 miles away from New Zealand. The only 2 other settled islands in the area are also not very close. There's the French Polynesia to the west and Easter Island to the east. They're in the middle freaking nowhere. Say what you will, at least they're safe from civilization's stupid mistakes. I heard China just had a weird outbreak from eating bats or whatever, which made them super effective at building hospitals, which is pretty nifty, I must say. Okay, so there's about 50 people living in some random island in the middle of the ocean. Why would I care? Unless there's something about booze, carjacking, and hot foreign ladies, I'm not interested. Oh boy, Pitcairn has quite an history. The first documented mention of the island happened in January 26 of 1606, when a Spanish ship stumbled upon the archipelago. However, because there was no people and settlements for them to pillage, they just kinda yeeted away, never to return. The islands then remained untouched until 1767, when they were discovered one final time by the crew of the British ship HMS Swallow. I mean, with that name. Anyways, they named the place after the first crew member to lay sight on the island, Robert Pitcairn, and that's how it came to be. They charted the island on their map so they could find it in the future, and they went on their merry way. Fast forward 20 years into the future and tensions are high. The HMS Bounty had been tasked by the Royal Navy to collect the most exquisite breadfruit plants from the island of Tahiti and bring them back to the American colonies so they could feed all of their unionized workers that have tons of rights. Only the Bounty never fulfilled its task due to its infamous mutiny on the ship. See, the Bounty's captain was a man called William Blight. While Blight was a competent captain, he was also an arrogant jerk. While stationed in Tahiti, a lot of the crewmen started getting friendly with the local people, especially a man called Fletcher Christian, who actually formed a very close relationship with one of the women. Captain Blight hated this and would become increasingly critical of his crew during their stay. Blight believed his crew were slacking, underperforming their duties, and succumbing to the temptations of the natives. During their 5-month stay in Tahiti, Blight would become a hated figure amongst many of the Bounty's crew. He also punished them severely, Christian and a bunch of other men were constant targets of Blight's floggings, which is cool whips on people's backs. That's totally not painful. On the morning of April 28th, 1789, after Blight had cut everyone's food and water supplies by half, Christian had decided he had had enough and started the infamous mutiny on the Bounty. 24 of the 46 crewmen sided with Christian and together managed to take control of all of the onboard weapons and seize control of the ship. After 5 hours held at gunpoint, Captain Blight and about 20 men still loyal to him were cast adrift and the Bounty was under the mutineers' control. Now, as you might expect, overthrowing an entire Royal Navy ship isn't a petty crime. Christian and the rest of the mutineers were essentially wanted criminals at this point, and they knew that the British Empire would soon send a ship to search and apprehend them. The Bounty held a vote. Many of the mutineers wanted to be dropped off back on Tahiti. On September 22, 1789, 16 mutineers were let off on shore and a few locals had been picked up. The Bounty then departed towards the east. On board were 9 mutineers and 20 Polynesians. Meanwhile, against all odds, Blight managed to survive being stranded in the open ocean. He must have been really mad since he wrote this list of every mutineer that has taken his boat from him. Anyways, while the mutineers were still struggling to find where to go, Blight had managed to travel all the way back to Kupang and Timor Islands, where he reported the incident back to England. Meanwhile, the Bounty is finally done not knowing what to do. They want to go east and find the Pitcairn Islands and live there forever. Only they don't know exactly where they are. You see, the previous British expedition didn't really mark the location of the islands that well, so they just kinda stumbled around for months and months until they eventually found the islands. On January 23rd, 1790, the Bounty was unloaded, stripped for parts, and then set ablaze to avoid detection. You can actually still see the wreck of the Bounty underwater to this day. And then they lived happily ever after. And we can now move on to the next section. Yay, except not. Settling in on the island was very difficult. Even though there was plenty of food, good land, and fresh water, many of the mutineers died through a series of what I'm gonna call drunken chaos. Essentially, a lot of the Polynesian men didn't like the fact that they were brought here against their will. You know, just a small detail. So they just kinda murdered a bunch of the mutineers, which then prompted some of the Polynesian women to kill some of the Polynesian men. There were also some people that were just way too drunk, fell off some rocks, and also a guy that had an asthma attack. By the time the first ship came to visit, an American vessel that had just stumbled upon the island, only one of the original mutineers was still alive. His name was John Adams, one of the lower-ranked members of the Bounty. The American vessel found a thriving community. John Adams had been able to keep peace on the island, taking care of the 9 remaining Polynesian women and 19 children. He would use the Bounty's Bible to teach literacy and Christianity. Hence the name Adamstown, in memory of John Adams, the only mutineer that actually has a grave on site. And that is it. Adams was pardoned for his crimes, and he lived on Pitcairn for 40 more years, until he died at the age of 61. Shortly after, the Pitcairn Islands became British territory, which they still are today. In 1850, the island became so overpopulated, the British government decided to give them the island of Norfolk, between Australia and New Zealand. But a small portion of people came back, and it's been like that ever since. Okay, no more history, on to the main question. How do you even get there? There are 2 main ways of getting there. The first one involves cruise ships. I don't know why I said it like that. A lot of cruise ships usually stop at Pitcairn for a few hours. Some of them even allow you to visit the town. Pitcairn gets about 15 cruise ships every year, and just remember there's more people in those boats than in the town itself. But that's the boring alternative. The second alternative to getting to Pitcairn involves Pitcairn's very own freighter ship. This ship is the island's life and blood. It keeps the island resupplied with anything they cannot produce themselves, especially fuel for their generators and their ATVs, not to mention all of the foodstuffs you can find in the store. For many years, Pitcairn was supplied by the Claymore II cargo ship. But in 2019 it was replaced by the much more modern MV Silver Supporter. If you want to get to Pitcairn and you don't have like a private boat, this is the way to get there. The Silver Supporter supplies the island every few weeks, going between Pitcairn and Mangareva in the French Polynesia throughout most of the year. It also travels all the way to New Zealand twice every year. To get to Pitcairn, their website recommends that you first travel to either Auckland, Los Angeles or Tokyo and take a flight directly to Tahiti in the French Polynesia. From there, there's a weekly flight that takes you from Tahiti to the small island of Mangareva. Mangareva has a very interesting airport, and that's coming from a guy who's known for trashing weird airports. But yeah, Mangareva's airport is just a stretch of sand in an atoll itself. You can literally exit the plane only to board a ferry that takes you to the island itself. Cool. From there, you'll just have to board the Silver Supporter, settle in its quite impressive passenger cabins, and travel for about 2 days in the open ocean until you reach Pitcairn. Alternatively, you can just travel to New Zealand and pray that it's one of those 2 times every year that the Silver Supporter comes to New Zealand, or you can just wait 6 months. From there, it's just 2 weeks in the open ocean before you can put your feet back on dry land. So how's it like living there? Well, after you get past the dreaded hill of difficulty, you'll find a very simple way of life. Apart from the cargo ship that comes by every month or so, which requires the townsfolk to bring out their longboats in order to bring the cargo back on shore, people fish and farm, and they essentially eat their own food. That's not to say they don't have any modern accommodations. They have electricity, TV, and internet, just to name a few. Even if they're quite limited, the electricity is powered by a generator, the TV only has 2 channels active at one time, and the internet connection is only 1 megabyte per second. That isn't bad by any means, and it is in fact sufficient. Hell, you could probably watch this video in the Pitcairn Islands with no problem. In fact, I dare you to do it. I dare you to do it. I want to see it on my analytics. There's just one last problem with the island. You see, back in 2004, several men were charged with sexual assault, and it was actually a pretty big deal. The thing was that those crimes were decades old and didn't take into account the fact that they were on an almost isolated island. When you're in an isolated island and future generations are at stake, you tend to incentivize people to be sexually active, no matter the cost. You can't really pick and choose. And finally, just to drive my point home, Adamstown was formed by a group of criminals that were eventually pardoned because they were able to create a thriving community. If that's the case, why couldn't the same be done for the descendants of the same people for crimes that were just as old? Anyways, getting to Pitcairn is an amazing journey of itself, and when you eventually get there, you won't find a town of sexual offenders. Instead, you'll find a town of simple people who are just very happy to see you. Goodbye.